Welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to do a deep dive into something that's on everyone's mind. The global impact of Donald Trump's second term. It feels like his return to power in 2025 has really thrown a wrench in the gears on the world stage. And it's left a lot of folks wondering, where America stands right now. We've got this fantastic article from the Financial Times by Martin Wolf. That, I think, is really going to help us unpack all of this.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting time to be looking at all this. I mean, even just looking at Trump's inauguration speech, that America First message is front and center. And it kind of suggests a shift away from that, global leadership role the U.S. has kind of held for so long. And it kind of points to a more transactional way of dealing with other countries.
Yeah, that transactional approach is what really stood out to me in Wolf's piece. It's kind of a loaded term, isn't it? What are we really talking about when we say that?
Yeah, you're right. It can sound a little bit clinical, but basically it boils down to an approach that prioritizes short-term wins and individual deals over those long-term alliances and shared values that have kind of shaped international relations for decades. It's almost like shifting from a "we're all in this together" to a "what's in it for me" mindset when it comes to foreign policy.
And Wolf really drives home the point that Trump sees this as a moment of liberation for America. It's like the U.S. has been weighed down by all these global commitments and can finally just act in its own interests.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder, what does that mean for countries that have always relied on the U.S. as an ally?
Yeah, that's the billion-dollar question. And Wolf cites some really interesting research from the European Council on Foreign Relations that shed some light on that. So they did a survey across a bunch of different countries. And what's striking is that close U.S. allies, the EU, the UK, South Korea, expressed the highest levels of anxiety about Trump's return. It's like they're sensing that America's word might not carry the same weight it used to.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? You've got countries like Russia, China, India, who see a Trump presidency as potentially beneficial to them, while America's closest partners are hitting the panic button. Feels like we might be on the verge of some kind of major realignment in global power.
Oh, absolutely. And that anxiety from U.S. allies, it speaks to a bigger issue that Wolf brings up, this potential erosion of what he calls the liberal international order, which sounds kind of jargony, but it's basically the framework of rules and institutions that have underpinned global cooperation since World War II. So if America's stepping back from that, it's a pretty significant shift. We could be talking about the unraveling of systems that have kept the world relatively stable for decades.
Okay, so we've got this backdrop of global uncertainty, these potentially fraying alliances, and this America First agenda that seems to be about short-term gains above all else. But how does all that actually play out in the real world? Where do we start to see the rubber hit the road, so to speak?
Well, I think one of the first places we're likely to see the impact is in global trade, which is an area where Trump has, never been shy about expressing his views. As Wolf points out, the decades after World War II saw a huge surge in global trade, driven in large part by policies that encouraged open markets and stability.
Right, and then Trump comes in with his, protectionist stance, ready to shake things up. I mean, his trade wars are good and easy to win. The line really sticks with you.
It does. And it kind of gets to the heart of his approach. He's deeply skeptical of free trade agreements, believes they've allowed other countries to, take advantage of the U.S. And what he seems to favor is a more managed trade system, one where the U.S. can use tariffs and other levers to extract concessions and kind of leveled the playing field in his view.
It's that whole foreigners will pay for it idea, which, anyone who take an Econ 101 can tell you isn't really how tariffs work in the long run.
Exactly. And Wolf does a great job of debunking that myth. He reminds us that tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods. And those costs ultimately get passed on to consumers in the country, imposing the tariffs. So if the U.S. slaps tariffs on, say, Chinese steel, it's American businesses and consumers who end up paying the price, in the form of higher prices.
It's like throwing a rock in a pond, right?
Yeah.
You get these ripples spreading outwards, affecting all sorts of unexpected things. I imagine this puts other countries in a really tough spot. They can't just sit back and take it. But retaliating with their own tariffs just fuels a trade war that ends up hurting everybody.
It's a real dilemma, and I think what we're likely to see is a lot of maneuvering, a lot of posturing, as countries try to figure out how to navigate this new landscape. And, Wolf really emphasizes that this is an area where the stakes are incredibly high, not just for the U.S. economy, but for, global stability as a whole.
Okay, so we've talked about these shift in alliances and the potential for trade turmoil. But what about I don't know, maybe the biggest challenge facing the world today, one that really requires global cooperation more than maybe any other issue. Climate change. How does a Trump presidency factor into all of that?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting and maybe a little bit concerning, too. You've got, this global scientific consensus on climate change. We're seeing record-breaking temperatures, rising sea levels, the whole nine yards. And then you've got Trump, who has repeatedly, dismissed climate change as a hoax, rolling back environmental regulations and really championing fossil fuels.
Yeah, it feels like we've gone from, yes, we can on clean energy to drill, baby, drill. Almost overnight.
It's quite the shift. And, what's really striking is that even though he inherited a U.S. economy that was, on relatively solid footing thanks to the policies of his predecessor, Trump continues to paint this picture of, economic doom and gloom.
Almost as if he needs there to be a crisis to justify his approach.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what makes his economic policies so, fascinating in a way. He's pushing for deregulation, tax cuts, increased spending, all while engaging in these trade disputes. It's a combination that, a lot of economists worry could reignite inflation and potentially lead to a clash with the Federal Reserve, which is tasked with keeping inflation under control.
And let's not forget about the elephant in the room, which is the U.S. national debt. It ballooned under his first term, and with these policies, it seems like it's just going to keep getting bigger. Is he kind of setting the stage for a major economic crisis down the road?
That's the big question, isn't it? Can he defy the odds and deliver on his promises of economic renewal? Or are we in for a turbulent ride? Maybe even another financial crisis. It's hard to say for sure, but I think one thing is clear. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for the U.S., but for the entire global economy.
Yeah, and it's not just about the U.S. economy either, right?
That's
The
right.
world's so interconnected these days. One country sneezes and everyone else catches a cold, economically speaking.
Yeah.
What happens in the U.S. has ripple effects everywhere.
Exactly. And that makes me think about something we haven't even touched on yet, the U.S. dollar. It's the world's reserve currency. Doesn't that give America a certain level of power, even if Trump is, pulling back from that global leadership role in other ways?
Absolutely. The dollar's dominance has been, a key factor in global finance for decades. It's the currency most widely used for trade and investment. And a lot of countries hold huge reserves of U.S. dollars. So yeah, what happens to the dollar matters, not just for Americans, but for everyone. I'm starting to see the connections here. So Trump wants to put America first, but by shaking things up with these trade wars and potentially, causing some instability in the U.S. economy, couldn't that actually weaken the dollar's position globally? It seems like that'd be kind of shooting himself in the foot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's a really sharp observation. And yeah, that's definitely a risk that a lot of people are watching very closely. If those trade wars escalate, you could see global trade decline, which would mean less demand for U.S. dollars. And if other countries start to, lose confidence in the U.S. economy, they might start shifting their reserves away from the dollar and diversifying their holdings.
Wow. So the dollar could actually lose its top dog status. What would that even look like? What kind of impact would that have?
Well, it would definitely make things a lot more unpredictable. You could see more volatility in exchange rates, which would make, international trade riskier and more expensive. And it would likely become more difficult for the U.S. government to, finance its debt, especially with the national debt already so high.
Okay, now I'm really starting to get nervous. It sounds like this America First approach, even if it's well-intentioned, could end up backfiring in some pretty spectacular ways. Is anyone in the U.S. government even thinking about these potential consequences?
Well, I'm sure they are. Policymakers around the world are keeping a very close eye on all of this. But, we are talking about complex systems here with lots of moving parts. It's hard to predict exactly how things will play out.
Fair enough. It sounds like we need to buckle up and get ready for a bumpy ride no matter what happens. Okay, before we go any further, I think I need to take a deep breath. This global stuff can get pretty heavy.
I hear ya. Maybe we can step back from the macroeconomics for a bit, zoom in on something a little more, concrete.
Yes, please. My brain needs a break from all this global doom and gloom. What else did Wolf cover in his article?
Well, he touched on something that's likely to be a big theme during Trump's second term, and something that always seems to generate a lot of heated debate. Immigration.
Right. That's an issue that never seems to go away, does it? What's the latest on that front?
Well, Trump's stance hasn't softened at all. He's already made it clear that he plans to, double down on restricting both legal and illegal immigration. The core argument being that, reducing immigration will protect American jobs. and bolster national security.
But doesn't that kind of ignore the economic contributions of immigrants? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
they fill so many essential roles in the workforce, especially in areas like agriculture, construction, healthcare. Wouldn't restricted immigration actually kind of harm the economy
Yeah.
by creating all these labor shortages?
That's the argument a lot of economists are making. It's a debate that's been going on for years, and there's no easy answer. Some studies show that reducing immigration could lead to higher wages for native-born workers. Others say it would lead to slower economic growth and actually make everyone worse off in the long run.
Uh-huh. So it's one of those complicated issues with valid points on both sides. No wonder it's such a hot-button topic. And I imagine Trump's, rhetoric on immigration is only going to intensify that debate, make it even harder to find common ground.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, I think. It's definitely an area where we can expect a lot of political wrangling, a lot of strong opinions on all sides.
Speaking of potentially explosive situations,
Yeah.
I can't help but think about Trump's relationship with Russia. I mean, that was a major storyline during his first term. And I can't imagine it's just going to quietly fade into the background now that he's back in office.
You're right to bring that up. Trump's approach to Russia and to Vladimir Putin in particular has been one of the most, controversial aspects of his presidency. And it's definitely something that people all over the world are going to be watching very closely.
Yeah, I remember all the talk of potential collusion during the 2020 campaign and the whole impeachment saga that followed. And through it all, Trump never really seemed to, condemn Russia's interference in the election. In fact, he often seemed to go out his way to praise Putin and downplay any wrongdoing. What does Wolf have to say about all that?
Well, he highlights the fact that Trump has repeatedly expressed, admiration for Putin's leadership style and has even floated the idea of lifting sanctions against Russia, which has, understandably, caused a lot of anxiety among America's allies, especially in Europe, where, Russia is seen as a very real threat.
Right. The U.S. and Europe have been pretty united in their opposition to, Russian aggression,
Yeah.
especially since the invasion of Ukraine a few years back. It seems like Trump might be trying to undo all of that. Is he serious about getting closer to Russia? And if so, what are the implications for global security?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one that has a lot of experts scratching their heads. On the one hand, Trump's actions often seem to contradict his words. He might talk a big game about getting along with Putin. But he also, signed into law a bill that increased sanctions against Russia.
It's like he's playing 4D chess while everyone else is still trying to figure out checkers.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, this unpredictability makes it so hard to know what to expect. Is he deliberately trying to, sow chaos and keep everyone guessing? Or is this just how he operates?
It's hard to say, but this tendency towards the unexpected is something we're just going to have to get used to. I think, Trump thrives on disruption. And he's not afraid to shake things up, even if it means, alienating allies or breaking with long-standing norms.
You're saying we should just expect the unexpected. That's not exactly reassuring, but I guess it makes things more interesting in a way, right?
It certainly keeps things lively. And who knows, maybe Trump will surprise us all. Maybe he'll turn out to be this, brilliant strategist who manages to negotiate some kind of last-in-peace agreement with Russia.
Yeah, maybe he'll win that Nobel Peace Prize everyone thought he would get. Okay, I'm trying to be optimistic here, but honestly, it's hard to shake this feeling of unease.
Yeah.
Is there anything in Wolf's article that gives us a reason to be hopeful about the future?
Well, he does point out that Trump's presidency has sparked some, important conversations about the role of America in the world and about the need to, reform global institutions to make them more equitable and effective.
That's a good point. I mean, even if you disagree with Trump's methods, he's definitely, shown a light.
And some of
the cracks in the system. Right?
Exactly. And maybe those cracks will ultimately lead to something better, something more durable and resilient. But it's going to be a messy process. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Well, that's not exactly the uplift and message I was hoping for. But I appreciate your honesty. It sounds like we're in for a period of turbulence and uncertainty, both at home and abroad. But hey, maybe that's what it takes to bring about real change.
Perhaps. And as Wolf reminds us, even in the face of uncertainty, knowledge is power. The more we understand about the forces at play, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges ahead.
Well said. So listeners, if you're feeling overwhelmed by all this global turmoil, take a deep breath, do your research, stay informed. That's the best way to, stay afloat in these choppy waters. Speaking of choppy waters, can we shift gears for a moment, talk about something a little less weighty?
Sure, what did you have in mind?
Well, I was thinking about the, cultural impact of Trump's presidency. Love him or hate him, the man is a cultural phenomenon. He's been the inspiration for countless memes, late-night comedy sketches, even some, pretty highbrow art.
That's true. He's definitely given comedians a wealth of material, that's for sure. And it's not just in the U.S. either, you know? Trump's antics have been satirized all over the world.
It's like he's a global punchline.
In a way, yeah. But humor can be a powerful tool for social commentary and political critique. I mean, Trump's presidency, whether you like it or not, has sparked some important conversations about everything from the role of the media in shaping public opinion to the rise of populism and the erosion of trust in institutions.
That's an interesting perspective. It's like even if you hate everything Trump stands for, you can't deny he's had this profound impact on culture, both here in the U.S. and globally.
Exactly, and it's an impact we're still trying to grapple with. We're only beginning to understand how his presidency has kind of reshaped the political landscape, the media landscape, even our understanding of truth and reality.
Whoa, that's getting pretty deep.
Yeah.
I think we might need another deep dive just to unpack all of that.
Maybe so, but for now, I think it's important to just acknowledge that Trump's cultural influence extends far beyond the realm of politics. He's become this kind of symbol, this touchstone for all sorts of anxieties, hopes, and frustrations that are kind of swirling around in the world today.
And whether we like it or not, that influence is going to continue to be felt for years to come.
Absolutely. I mean,
Right.
We're living in the age of Trump, whether we like it or not. And it's an age that's defined by disruption, uncertainty, and, this blurring of the lines between reality and spectacle.
Okay, I think I need another deep breath. This conversation is taking me on a roller coaster ride. But I guess that's what makes it so fascinating, right? I mean, we're living through a historical moment. And it's impossible to know what the future holds.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? We're all figuring this out together, trying to make sense of this, chaotic world. And who knows, maybe the chaos will eventually give way to something new, something better. But we'll only get there if we're willing to, engage with the difficult questions, to have these uncomfortable conversations, and to keep searching for those, nuggets of truth and insight.
Well said. So, listeners, keep those minds open, those critical thinking skills sharp, and those hearts full of hope. We're all in this together, and we'll get through it. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up for today.
It certainly feels that way, doesn't it?
It does. And, it's what makes these deep dives so exciting. But before we get too carried away with the whole, grand sweep of history, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about Trump being a global punchline. It kind of makes me wonder, is that ultimately how his presidency will be remembered? As this sort of reality TV show gone wrong?
That's a great question. And honestly, I'm not sure anyone has the answer to that yet. But I think it's important to remember that humor can be a really powerful coping mechanism. When we laugh at something, it doesn't necessarily mean we're dismissing its seriousness. Sometimes it's a way of, processing the absurdity of a situation, finding a bit of light in the darkness.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, sometimes you just got to laugh to keep from crying, right? But I'm also curious about, how historians will grapple with the fact that Trump was, arguably, the first reality TV star to become president. How much did his celebrity status contribute to his political success? And how will that shape his legacy?
That's a really interesting question, and I think it's one that historians will be debating for years to come. There's no doubt that Trump's fame, his mastery of the media, his ability to connect with a certain segment of the population, all of that played a significant role in his rise to power.
He definitely understood how to, grab attention and control the narrative, often by bypassing those traditional media outlets. Yeah. And communicating directly with his supporters through social media.
And that's a trend that I think we're going to see continue. This shift in how people consume information, this fragmentation of the media landscape, the rise of these echo chambers where people are only exposed to viewpoints that reinforce their existing beliefs.
It's kind of scary, actually. If everyone's living in their own little bubble, how can we even have those productive, challenging conversations that are so essential for a healthy democracy,
Yeah, that's the big challenge we face in this new media landscape, isn't it? We need to find ways to break out our echo chambers, engage with different perspectives, cultivate a sense of, shared reality. Otherwise, we risk becoming even more divided and polarized as a society.
Well said. And I think that brings us back to the core purpose of this whole deep dive, right? To explore these complex issues, to challenge our own assumptions, and to hopefully, gain a deeper understanding of the world around us. So circling back to where we started, what's the big takeaway here? What does Trump's second term mean for the world?
Well, it's still early days, and I don't have a crystal ball or anything. But based on what we've discussed today, I think it's safe to say that we're entering a period of, profound change and uncertainty. Trump's America First agenda, his unpredictable nature, his willingness to, disrupt the status quo, all of that has the potential to reshape the global landscape in ways we can't even imagine yet.
It's almost like we're standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at this vast, uncharted territory. It's both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Exactly. And it's up to each of us to decide how we're going to navigate this new terrain. Are we going to cling to the familiar, or are we going to embrace the unknown and see where it takes us?
Well, I think I'm leaning towards embracing the unknown, even if it's a bit scary. But I'm definitely going to pack a good map and a compass.
Good idea. And remember, knowledge is power. The more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate those challenges ahead.
Well said. So, listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. The world needs your voices, your ideas, and your energy now more than ever.
And remember, even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. We have the power to shape our own destinies, to create a better future, for ourselves and for generations to come.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring.